The Battle of Yorktown, fought in 1781, was a pivotal and decisive engagement during the American Revolutionary War, ultimately leading to the end of British rule in the 13 colonies and the birth of the United States of America. This battle, which took place in the small town of Yorktown, Virginia, involved a coalition of American and French forces working together to deliver a crippling blow to the British Army. The events leading up to this battle, the strategies employed by both sides, the intensity of the siege, and its profound aftermath all contribute to its significance in history. The American Revolutionary War had been raging for 6 years by the time the Battle of Yorktown began. The war started in 1775 with skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, followed by the formation of the Continental Army under the command of General George Washington. Initially, the conflict was confined to the northern colonies, with major battles such as those at Bunker Hill, Saratoga, and Princeton. However, by 1780, the war had shifted to the southern colonies, where the British hoped to rally loyalist support and slowly regain control. The British strategy in the South, led by General Charles Cornwallis, initially met with some success. Cornwallis's forces won several significant victories, including the capture of Charleston, South Carolina, in 1780, which was one of the worst defeats for the American forces during the war. However, the tide began to turn against the British as they encountered fierce resistance from American forces led by commanders such as Nathanael Greene and Daniel Morgan. Despite the British victory at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, Cornwallis's army suffered heavy casualties, and the strategic situation grew increasingly precarious. In the summer of 1781, Cornwallis moved his forces into Virginia, hoping to link up with British reinforcements and supplies via the Chesapeake Bay. He chose the town of Yorktown, located on a peninsula between the York and James Rivers, as his base of operations. Yorktown's location was strategic. It allowed Cornwallis to fortify his position while awaiting support from the British Navy, which was expected to arrive from New York. Cornwallis began constructing fortifications around Yorktown, turning the town into a strong defensive position. However, his choice to settle in Yorktown would prove to be a grave mistake. At the same time, General George Washington, commander of the Continental Army, was in New York, where he had been planning an attack on British forces under General Sir Henry Clinton. However, Washington received intelligence that Cornwallis was in Yorktown and decided to shift his focus to the south. Washington knew that defeating Cornwallis could end the war, and he devised a plan to trap the British forces in Yorktown with the help of the French, who had entered the war on the American side in 1778. Washington's strategy hinged on coordination with the French army under General Jean-Baptiste Donatien de Vimeur, Comte de Rochambeau, and the French Navy under Admiral François-Joseph Paul de Grasse. Rochambeau's forces had been stationed in Newport, Rhode Island, and they began marching south to join Washington's troops in New York. The combined Franco-American army then made a rapid march from New York to Virginia, a remarkable feat of logistics and discipline. Meanwhile, Admiral de Grasse sailed from the Caribbean to the Chesapeake Bay, where he planned to blockade Cornwallis by sea. The march from New York to Yorktown was fraught with challenges. Washington and Rochambeau had to keep their plans secret to prevent the British from reinforcing Cornwallis or launching an attack on their forces. The Franco-American army moved quickly, covering over 400 miles in just a few weeks, often in sweltering heat and over difficult terrain. Along the way, Washington and Rochambeau maintained strict discipline to ensure the army remained intact and focused on the task ahead. As Washington and Rochambeau approached Yorktown, de Grasse's fleet arrived in the Chesapeake Bay, effectively cutting off Cornwallis's escape route by sea. On September 5, 1781, the French Navy engaged a British fleet under Admiral Thomas Graves in the Battle of the Chesapeake, also known as the Battle of the Capes. This naval battle was crucial because it prevented the British from reinforcing or evacuating Cornwallis's army. The French victory at sea ensured that Cornwallis would be trapped in Yorktown with no hope of escape or resupply. With the British forces isolated, Washington, Rochambeau, and the Marquis de Lafayette, who had already been operating in Virginia, began to converge on Yorktown. By late September, the Franco-American Army, numbering around 17,000 troops, had surrounded Cornwallis's 8,000 soldiers. The siege of Yorktown commenced on September 28, 1781. The American and French forces worked together to construct a series of parallel trenches and fortifications, gradually tightening the noose around the British defenses. The siege involved intense artillery bombardment, with American and French cannons bombarding British positions day and night. The artillery fire was relentless, causing significant damage to the British fortifications and inflicting heavy casualties on Cornwallis's troops. As the siege progressed, the Franco-American forces inched closer to the British lines, eventually constructing a second parallel trench even closer to the enemy. One of the key moments in the siege was the assault on two British redoubts, known as Redoubt 9 and Redoubt 10, which were crucial to the British defensive line. On the night of October 14, 1781, American and French troops launched a coordinated attack on these redoubts. The Americans, led by Alexander Hamilton, captured Redoubt 10 in a fierce hand-to-hand combat, while the French forces successfully took Redoubt 9. The capture of these redoubts allowed the Franco-American forces to move their artillery even closer to the British positions, further intensifying the bombardment. By mid-October, the situation for Cornwallis had become dire. His forces were exhausted, low on supplies, and suffering from disease and constant bombardment. Cornwallis made a desperate attempt to escape by crossing the York River to Gloucester Point, but a storm disrupted the operation, forcing him to abandon the plan. With no other options remaining, Cornwallis decided to negotiate surrender terms. On October 17, 1781, Cornwallis sent a drummer and an officer to the American lines to request a ceasefire and begin negotiations. Over the next 2 days, representatives from both sides met to discuss the terms of surrender. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis formally surrendered his army to Washington and Rochambeau. The ceremony, held at the Moore House just outside Yorktown, marked the end of the battle and the effective end of major military operations in the American Revolutionary War. Cornwallis, citing illness, did not attend the surrender ceremony, instead sending his second-in-command, General Charles O'Hara, to present his sword to Washington. In a symbolic gesture, Washington refused to accept the sword from O'Hara and directed him to present it to General Benjamin Lincoln, Washington's own second-in-command, who had suffered the humiliation of surrendering Charleston to the British the previous year. The victory at Yorktown was a decisive and stunning blow to the British war effort. News of the defeat quickly spread across the Atlantic, reaching London in late November 1781. The British government, led by Prime Minister Lord North, was shaken by the loss, and public support for the war plummeted. Although it took several more months of negotiations, the British eventually recognized the futility of continuing the conflict. In 1782, peace talks began in Paris, culminating in the Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783, which officially ended the war and recognized the independence of the United States. The Battle of Yorktown is often considered the climax of the American Revolutionary War, but its significance extends far beyond the battlefield. The victory was the result of a remarkable combination of military strategy, international cooperation, and sheer determination. It demonstrated the importance of alliances in achieving victory, as the support of the French was crucial to the success of the American cause. The battle also underscored the leadership and resilience of figures like George Washington, whose ability to inspire and lead his troops played a pivotal role in securing American independence. Yorktown's legacy is also reflected in the global context. The American victory at Yorktown had profound implications for the balance of power in Europe and the wider world. It inspired revolutionary movements in other parts of the world, including France, where the financial and ideological impact of the American Revolution contributed to the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. The battle also marked the beginning of the end of the British Empire's dominance in the Americas, as it signaled that colonial resistance could successfully challenge and overthrow imperial rule. In the years that followed, the Battle of Yorktown became enshrined in American memory as a symbol of the triumph of liberty over tyranny. The site of the battle is now preserved as part of the Colonial National Historical Park, where visitors can explore the battlefield, learn about the events that took place there, and reflect on the significance of this turning point in American history. The Battle of Yorktown was not just a military victory. It was a moment of profound transformation that changed the course of history. It marked the birth of a new nation, the United States of America, and the beginning of a new era in global politics. The principles of self-determination, freedom, and democracy that were fought for at Yorktown continue to resonate around the world, reminding us of the enduring legacy of the American Revolution and the power of people to shape their own destiny.